Okay, test. And I'm saying good day to everyone who's watching live. I see that people already started chatting in the channel. So we have Natalie Brunell with us today. So Nat, we've chatted a bit before the start, as we usually do with guests, just to give some background on our channel. Can you please give us your background on you? Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm kind of a neighbor because I was born in Poland. So my family would travel to Bulgaria when I was really little, but I don't really remember it. So I would love to go back someday. But I was born in Poland. My family moved to Chicago. My parents wanted to flee communism. They grew up under a communist regime. And there was no opportunity. There was no sense of social mobility. So they wanted to pursue the American dream. They moved my family to Chicago area, and they waited for almost 30 years to be able to come to the United States. My mom was 38, my dad was 41. And when they moved, I just saw them work so hard my whole life. They were getting up super early, working multiple jobs, working really hard. And my mom always had dinner on the table at night when I would be home doing my homework. And they're just the most loving, amazing, hardworking parents. But because of their immigration story, I always knew I have to work hard and I have to try to become financially stable. The problem is in the United States, even at the best universities, you're not taught financial literacy or how money printing works or just really anything about how our financial system was set up. And so I had to kind of learn it on my own. And I pursued journalism. I wanted to be a reporter, a news anchor, because I grew up watching, Barbara Walters and Oprah Winfrey. So I thought I would like to have that kind of job. And I became a journalist. I was a journalist for about 10 years. And in 2017, I was told about Bitcoin. I didn't understand it. I thought it was just, I thought it was like a stock, to be honest. I thought it could go up, it could go down, but it really ultimately doesn't serve a bigger purpose. And then someone gave me the book, The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous, which is now my favorite book. I recommend it to everybody. And I started to peel back the layers and understand how our financial system around the world works. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is why what happened to my parents happened, because my parents actually lost everything in the last financial crisis. So they had just saved enough to buy their first house in America and they lost it all again. And yeah, it's just life is not as easy in the United States as I think a lot of people think. You have to work really hard. Planning for retirement's really difficult. And unless you know how to invest and be strategic with stocks and real estate, it's really hard to make a living and just have a job, be able to pay for your future. So I really appreciated what Bitcoin was offering and what it was trying to fix. And so I started a podcast and it took off and it did really well. And now I quit my job as a reporter last year just to focus on Bitcoin education and Bitcoin content full time. So hopefully that wasn't too long of a background, but that's my story.
Not at all. Thanks so much for sharing that. So I have 3 questions if you don't mind. So first one is you said that your family lost everything in the 2008 financial crisis. How? Why? What happened and what could they have done differently in order to avoid that?
So both of my parents were working just, kind of low income jobs. My dad became an electrician. My mom was working as a bank teller. So, minimum wage. And they had saved enough for a down payment. And if you remember at the time, basically banks and everyone was pushing you to get into debt. You could take out a loan when you didn't have that much collateral, and everyone was just encouraging people to take on debt. So my parents took out a mortgage, and then my mom, she thought, well, maybe I'll start my own business. I want to start a little eatery and share the food that I grew up with my community. So she went to the bank, she talked about what options she had, and they were like, oh, you should take out a second mortgage on the house to do that. So basically they just doubled down on debt. And then it was right as the financial crisis began to unwind. So literally it was like they took out this massive loan, they bought a house worth a certain amount, and then everything came crashing down. The house was suddenly worth less than the loan they took out, and they went bankrupt. My family lost everything.
Damn. Did they lose the house or did they still own the house?
No, we lost the house. My mom lost her business, everything. So they started over. They moved into a really small 1-bedroom condo. They had like a bankruptcy on their credit reports. It was awful. It was an awful time. I was in college and my parents didn't even tell me everything because they were trying to shelter me from, just I think the stress of all of it. And it's really hard when you lose everything and have to start over. And we didn't have relatives that could help us financially here. We were first generation. So it just meant, more hard work. And at this point, my parents are getting older. They're in their 50s and 60s thinking, they should be thinking about retiring and they can't. They just have to keep working. And so I think that really lit a fire in me because I felt like the whole system was so unfair, right? Like my parents worked really hard, paid their taxes, they're good people, trying to take care of their family. They didn't get bailed out and get to keep their house, but like the big corporations, the big companies that were irresponsible, they did get bailed out and the CEOs got bonuses, and it's just like, that really taught me that the whole system is rigged and it's not fair and it hurts the little guy to protect the big guy. And that's why I love Bitcoin, because I feel like it flips everything on its head. The big guy doesn't matter more than the little guy, right? We're all at the same table. And I really think that that's powerful because I think the problems in the world that we see today are largely the result of the concentration of power, especially economic power.
I was gonna say a few things. So firstly, if they didn't lose the cows, if they were able to continue paying the down payment or whatever, probably by now the price of the house should be about the same, or maybe they turn some profit. Secondly, for the years before that, I would imagine, I don't know, X amount of years, 5, 6, 7 years, whoever was doing that, taking on a debt, purchasing a house, and then the house was growing up faster than the loan plus the interest rate. In Canada at the moment, for instance, they have insane housing bubble. The house is literally doubled and tripled in price for the past few years. And I was just thinking how literally in today's world, you must be, first you must have a craft. Doesn't matter what it is. You could be a hairdresser, you could be a bank teller, you could be a taxi driver, you could be a developer or architect or whatever. Plus though, you must be a financial advisor that decides where to put your money, what is a good stock right now, is it a good time to enter the market or to exit the market, just so you protect yourself from inflation.
I know, it's horrible. You have to have 2 jobs, basically. You have to have your job that earns you the money, and then you have to have your job that you take your money and try to protect the purchasing power and the value of it, because everyone has to become a day trader on the side because your money is losing its value every single day, no matter where you live in the country. And unfortunately, the way that the system is set up is if you take on a lot of debt or if you have a lot of money and you have assets, you do well in the system. But, everyone else, like you mentioned, how is a hairdresser supposed to survive today in America? I mean, how is someone who has a postal worker job supposed to survive in America? I live in Los Angeles, and I always remember, so growing up, I loved Arnold Schwarzenegger because my family loved his movies. My brother and my dad would watch all of his movies, so I loved him. He was my favorite action star. And he did this interview once where he talked about buying real estate in Venice, California in 1970s. Venice has some of the most expensive real estate in the world, right? It's right on the beach near Santa Monica. And he said in 1970, a postal worker could buy a house in Venice because it was like a $30,000 house. Today, I mean, unless that postal worker was an early investor in Bitcoin, they could never afford a house in Venice on a standard wage job, So something has changed drastically and something is fundamentally broken.
Because you mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the questions that we just discussed before we started was celebrities. So tell me your opinion on celebrities. What is their role to play in Bitcoin's adoption? And who do you think at the moment, if you can name any names, are celebrities that are really doing their best for Bitcoin adoption? And we put aside, let's say, Cynthia Loomis, who is not a celebrity, she's a politician, but to me she's a celebrity because she does such a great job, educating and just talking, positively about Bitcoin, in contrast with so many other politicians.
Well, I agree with you. I love Senator Lummis. I actually had the honor of having dinner with her and Michael Saylor just 2 weeks ago. And I just think that they're both fantastic. They're both celebrities to me. But no, it's interesting because I think the idea of celebrity has changed a lot, right? Like before, it used to be movie stars. It used to just be Arnold Schwarzenegger and George Clooney and Brad Pitt and maybe, famous people that you would watch on television or in movies. And today it's a lot of people from the internet. It's like influencers and, people that I've never even heard of. But I think the word influence is really important because we need people who have influence and who have big followings and who have large communities that trust them to get behind Bitcoin and to understand it. And I think it's incumbent upon those people to surround themselves with the right, educators. And I certainly I'm trying to do my part to get into the room with people who are important or have influence to really teach them about Bitcoin so they don't go down the path of like shilling all these other tokens, right? And so I'm inspired when I hear about a celebrity getting into the space, but I also can easily tell when they haven't done the work, when they're just reading off of lines. And I'm sure you've seen it. Like we've had Mariah Carey do commercials for Gemini. We've had, Matt Damon for crypto.com. I know Reese Witherspoon is getting into the space, but when you watch them, that like they don't get it. They don't get that our financial system's completely broken and Bitcoin's trying to address these very specific things. And so while I'm excited that they're coming in, they need to do some more work, and there need to be people that go to them and say, hey, let me sit you down and tell you about Bitcoin. Like Reese Witherspoon is super into NFTs and she wants to empower women, which I'm like, that's awesome. But wait, let me tell you about Bitcoin, and I don't think a lot of people have had that opportunity to share the message with them. But the more people, I agree with what Michael Saylor says, the more people who have followings and influence that get into Bitcoin, the larger adoption, just spills out, grows, and we desperately need that. So it was cool to see some celebrities at the Bitcoin conference like Serena Williams and Aaron Rodgers, some of the big sports people, Michelle Phan, who has a huge following. But yeah, it's going to take some time because a lot of celebrities, they might say they're into Bitcoin, but they don't really get it yet.
One of the names that popped up in my head and you didn't mention was Paris Hilton. She was in that late tonight show or whatever it's called. Again, we are Bulgarians, okay? We don't watch American television that much, so we just know them as names, but then you watch maybe one episode and that's it. Anyway, with that Jimmy something guy, Jimmy
Fallon.
Exactly,
Jimmy
yes.
Fallon.
And my point is like, and this is my new NFT connection, and you get the first NFT on about this board tape because it kind of looks like me, and it's literally like that doesn't look like you at all. And then she's like, and this is the first NFT, it goes for you, and then for everyone in the audience tonight there will be an NFT and so on. And I feel, I'm gonna say it, you don't need to agree with me, you tell me your stance, it could be like politically correct stance and decide not to comment, but I feel like Paris Hilton does not understand at all what problem does Bitcoin solve, and she's just like, oh, I can make money with these NFTs.
Yeah, I've heard good and not so great things about situations like this. So for example, I actually have a friend who worked with Paris Hilton and says she's a very smart cookie. She knows the business deals she's going to go after. She's strategic. She takes the time to understand what the business deal is going to be. But yes, I agree that in a case like this, she probably doesn't understand what problem Bitcoin is really trying to fix, especially for the little guy, because if we're being totally honest, her family has largely been the beneficiary of an easy money system, right? Where you can take out loans, you can open up more businesses. Fiat has allowed for people in the business world to become these massive, corporations, too big to fail, oligarchs. And the people who benefit from that system probably don't understand what's wrong with it or why they should be against it. So I don't think that she has a bad heart, though. I'm sure that if someone took the time to sit down and educate her, she would probably be really excited about Bitcoin and what it could do for all of her followers and all of her fans. But, I agree. If she's just giving out NFTs under the seats of this late night show, then that's obviously very different from what Bitcoin is trying to do in terms of fixing the world.
Yeah. I was thinking that, and you mentioned it, how very frequently rich people have a blind spot for how the system is broken, because even though it's broken, either it works for them, either even if it doesn't, they just have so much inertia, so much speed that they outpace the broken system. And they don't feel it. They don't. It doesn't affect them much. And I feel like, like again, you've seen Michael Saylor, you sit with him, you've talked with him, you had dinner with him. I haven't. From what I see, he's a rich person, but he gets the problem and he really tries to fix it for everybody. Yeah. So you tell me, like, do rich people need Bitcoin? And if yes, why?
I think everybody needs Bitcoin. I don't think that we should live in a world that has such unfair, I guess, terms and incentives. I think that even rich people would love to live in a world where everyone's not so divided and frustrated, right? Because I think that even more so now than ever, there's sort of a frustration and I don't know if jealousy is the right word, but I feel like there's not a sense of, that person worked really hard, and I great for them for getting to that spot. I feel like right now everyone feels, especially in America, like middle class, which is dying in America, there's this feeling of frustration and feeling like people are left behind because the system's rigged. I think everyone recognizes that there's a problem. They just don't know what it is or how to solve it, which is what is so great about Bitcoin, because it really teaches you exactly what the problem is. But I would love to live in a world, whether I was poor or rich, where people had access to opportunity, where people could make something of themselves, where people were judged on their merit as opposed to anything else, as opposed to like freebies here, rent seeking here. Oh, this guy knew this guy, this company was close to this politician. It should be more fair, right? Like, I think Bitcoin introduces an opportunity to create an economic system that's more just and based on, supply, demand, goods, services, as opposed to who knows who. So I would hope that rich people would want a system like that, where their children could grow up and have it not be moving in the direction of more authoritarianism and more civil unrest and like this ballooning wealth gap where there's, people in tents on the street and on the other block there's mansions. Like, that's not a beautiful world to live in. So I think poor people, rich people, everybody needs Bitcoin.
I agree with everything you said, but I want to add one caveat to it, and it's the following. It depends, when you're a rich person, how did you make your wealth? And again, I'm going to say it, you're free to disagree with it for one reason or another, but in my mind pops up two names. One is Janet Yellen, and the other one is, I forgot his name, Elizabeth Warren, I think it is, the Bond lady, who is the fearless enemy of Bitcoin. And when you look into them, when you look into their annual salary, and you look into their net worth, and you look into the money that they've made off of speaking fees, and we understand that in US we have the so-called lobbying system, which is literally corruption that is public, but no one goes to jail for it. You understand that there is some people who don't make their wealth off of hard work, off of knowledge, off of being the first or the best, but just being, as you said, knowing some people. So I would feel like some of these people would never want actually a just system, because they do understand that if the system was just, they wouldn't be so privileged as they are today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really sad what's happened with politics in our country, because you're absolutely right. People are able to fail up. They can basically do a horrible job and spend a bunch of money that's not theirs and then get promoted and keep going. And now they're in office, 30, 40 years, the system keeps getting worse, and yet they get reelected and they can retire on a really nice pension. So I've never thought that was fair. I think it's horrible that we have a system that is that way. And I agree that people like Elizabeth Warren, who, it's what's frustrating about people like Senator Elizabeth Warren is that we have a very strong, passionate, smart community that's trying to educate her and trying to sit her down in a happy, constructive, cheerful way to say, hey, let me explain to you how this will help the people that voted for you. And it's like the door is just shut. She won't allow the door to open to learn and to understand so that she can maybe make a better judgment call. So that is when I get very frustrated, because it's like, at least listen, sit down first and listen and understand and learn. And then you can make a decision on what you think about it. But we have a lot of politicians who won't even enter that conversation. That being said, I think a lot of politicians, and probably including Elizabeth Warren, I think that they go into the system with good intentions. I think that they want to help, or they want to feel like, you know, they're contributing to the public good. But the system is so corrupt and broken that it allows for all of these, you know, mismanaged incentive programs, manipulation, like you mentioned, speaking fees that are ridiculous to go to talk at a big bank because the big bank now wants to,
I checked her. I think it was Elizabeth Warren or Janet Yellen. It was Janet Yellen. She makes $250,000 a year from her normal salary job, and her salary job is paid from the taxpayer. My salary job is paid for my employee. He gets the money from the company that hires them. So it's an actual circle economic where we all create value for each other on some margin. Her salary though doesn't come from economical activity. It comes from the taxpayer, from the money that was taken from everyone's taxes. And she makes $250,000 a year from that. So this is pretty much for what she has to be grateful for to the taxpayer. And then she I forgot what was the number, but it was millions, like 6 million or something like that in the past 2 years from speaking fees. So obviously her heart stays with the companies that pay her 6 million than with the, people from the taxpayers that pay her 250 grand a year.
I don't know. It's horrible. It's completely broken. And I think I said on Twitter when the discussion was coming out about, taxing unrealized gains, I said we should tax, the speaking fees 100% because that is, they are elected to serve the public. And a lot of people, I think, once they get into power corrupts, money corrupts, and they don't serve the public anymore. They're serving themselves. I mean, I truly think it's crazy and ridiculous that we have politicians who are living in like $5 million mansions in America, when the average person is, suffering when they go to the gas station or to the grocery store. How is a politician in like a $5 million mansion in a really nice city? I don't understand that. And to me, it's like, it's wrong. And then, and then you could take it one step further, right? Because they say, oh, we have to do this. We have to have open borders. We have to have all this stuff. It's like, well, then you sponsor people at your beautiful mansion, like let them all in. It's just silly. It's just like, I think that politicians are hypocrites in the sense that a lot of them become, I think, jaded in office, or something happens where they say one thing but they practice another. And when I was a reporter, I reported a lot on that, where a politician would come in and say, oh, I want to cut funding by $100 million for whatever agency, let's say it was the police, and then they would have a police officer at their house 24 hours a day protecting them. So it's like, well, the public doesn't get it anymore, but I still get it because I'm a politician. And I just think that's so unfair. I believe in the rule of law, which is why I think I also like Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin has all these very specific rules and no rulers, whereas our system is the opposite. We have a ton of rulers and no one's even following the law anymore, especially in places like Los Angeles where I live. We've really abandoned that. So no, we need a lot of change to the system for sure.
Yeah, earlier you said about Elizabeth Warren that well-intended people want to have a friendly conversation with her, just to explain to her what Bitcoin does and how it does it and why it does it and so on. And I remember from, I don't know, like a few weeks ago, there was this hearing where she says, oh, Russian oligarchs are gonna launder their money and be able to run around the sanctions that we imposed on them using cryptocurrencies and using, mixers and cross-chain transactions. I don't know what else she said. They're gonna avoid now pretty much like the swap on the hand that we tried to do on Russia. And then the guy from Chainalysis or whatever the company it was, he said like, well, factually talking, it's not possible because the mixer daily volume is like 30 million, so you cannot launder billions through it. It's just impossible. The other thing is like we track the blockchains, and hopping from one blockchain to another through a bridge, it doesn't help. We still see the funds were here, then they laid it on that address, we still see others. And the third one that she said was, they're gonna split their billions in multiple free to create wallets, and then they're gonna launder them that way. And the guy was like, yeah, I get it, but but we still see the 1,000 wallets, right? Like we still track them. You understand that, right? And it's like, oh no, like I'm very surprised with your answer because we pay you so much money, and then you're giving me the wrong answers, not the one I was seeking for. Like it's blatant corruption to me, looking from the other side of the world.
Yeah, I saw that video as well. And again, kind of what I mentioned earlier, it's like she won't just take the time to listen. She won't, people are trying to educate her and she just shuts the door in their face. She interrupts them. She doesn't allow them to finish their sentence. And I don't think that that is doing her constituents and voters justice. I think that she really needs to take the time to learn, because if she understood Bitcoin, she would not be against it. You know, if you're against Bitcoin, it's clear you don't understand it. If you're for Bitcoin, then clearly you've done the work. And it takes some time, it takes some work. So I think that that will change, though. I think more and more people just will see it as, you know, the best opportunity and the best wealth transfer that's ever existed.
I think it's, as Michael Saylor says, I haven't met a single educated person against Bitcoin that took the time, took 1,000 hours to educate himself, and then he's like, okay, here are my issues with Bitcoin. Usually they're coming with the same, foot over and over again since 10 years ago. Literally, just recently a guy asked me, okay, but what's going to happen if electricity stops? And I'm like, dude, like, come on. We're not 2010 when people came up with that question, like 12 years ago. But on the topic of politics across US, we have the mayor of Miami. I forgot his name again. What was his name again?
Francis Suarez, yeah.
Francis Suarez, okay. And the mayor of New York, I have no idea what his name was again. The new mayor.
Eric Adams.
Eric Adams, exactly, okay. So they're literally dueling it up for being the capital, not just of US, but of the world of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, of course. So tell me, what is the positive development that you see in the past? How many is it now? Like 5 years, since 2017 until now? Because back in 2017, literally, Bitcoin was still heavily retail driven. Politicians were not much interested in it. And I really feel like today it's a big talking point in politics, and literally it's a make it or break it career choice for a politician to be pro crypto or to be against it.
I totally agree with you. I think the community is doing a great job getting into the offices with politicians at local and national levels just to say, hey, what's your stance on Bitcoin? We need an answer, right? And so I think that the politicians who have come out for Bitcoin and done the work, they are benefiting from that. They're benefiting from the PR that comes with being pro Bitcoin. At the same time, I think, the Bitcoin community is about proof of work. It's about proof of work in the computer network, but also proof of work in the community, because Eric Adams, he came out, he's like, yeah, I'll take my paycheck in Bitcoin. And they were sort of sparring with each other, him and Suarez. But then I don't know if you remember, Eric said, I'm for Bitcoin, but not Bitcoin mining. And it's like, well, you can't be for Bitcoin and against Bitcoin mining and not understand, proof of work. So there's still definitely some work to be done, because a lot of politicians in America just don't understand it. They don't get it. But I'm really encouraged to see people like Mayor Francis Suarez, who I think might even potentially be considering a run for the Republican ticket on a national level in 2024. So that would be interesting. But look, he's driven so much investment and interest and competition in Miami. I mean, right now, I swear all my friends are moving to either Miami or Austin, Texas, because they're very Bitcoin and crypto friendly. They're very friendly to innovation and entrepreneurship in the space. And so they're getting the best and brightest minds. It's really frustrating because the rent is like skyrocketing, but they're more about freedom and technology. So I think that's really important. And I think Miami, as well as Austin and maybe New York, will become epicenters for this industry. But, we also see, you have your shirt on from El Salvador. We have President Nayib Bukele, who's doing the same thing. He's trying to attract capital and investment in El Salvador. And people, when I went there twice this past year to visit, people used to want to flee the country and come to America, and people would wait for their money being sent from American relatives. And now they're dreaming the El Salvador dream. They want to stay. They want to invest in their communities. They're learning about Bitcoin. They're transacting in Bitcoin and learning how to save and accumulate sats. So, it's really exciting. And I think that the political leaders who embrace Bitcoin, they will benefit and they will see their communities foster more growth and profitability and abundance than the ones who don't.
Absolutely. So listen, the Bitcoin fight is a fight on the world stage. It's happening in Bulgaria, it's happening in the States, it's happening in Salvador, it's happening in China, it's happening everywhere. So firstly, if I forget some of the names of American politicians or companies or whatever, it's not out of respect. The fact that I'm thinking about them means that I think that they're very important. It's hard for me as a Bulgarian to remember the names because our, names are like completely different sounding.
Good job. You've done a great job.
So that being said, I'm extremely interested in what's happening in the US. As I think before we started, I said that pretty much US at the moment runs the world. Yes, sure, we have rising powers, we have China, we have Russia trying to do something, but US runs the world as of right now. What the Fed does, the European Central Bank copies, China copies, everyone's copies. And I'm most interested in what's happening in the US than I'm interested in what's happening in Bulgaria. Literally, it affects me more. Literally, it just affects me more. So having that in mind, putting back Bitcoin on the table, I feel like, again, where was where was Cynthia Umis from? What was her state center? Wyoming, right. So we have Wyoming, we have Texas, which is extremely pro-Bitcoin. Can you tell me a few words about Texas and them being on the Bitcoin map?
Yeah, so I haven't spent too much time in Texas, but Austin is really a big capital for Bitcoin technology and companies. Unchained is based there. A couple of different companies are in Austin. A lot of the big names in Bitcoin are there, and they're trying to encourage me to move. But one thing that's interesting about Texas is we have people who are running for the governor's seat who are all pro-Bitcoin. There have been bills that have been introduced to have Bitcoin become legal tender, which I don't think will happen. We're not ready for that in the United States. But, the fact that these lawmakers are trying to introduce bills to get us there already, that's pretty exciting. And also Senator Ted Cruz, whether you like him or not, whether you're right wing, left wing,
I love him.
It doesn't. The guy has done his homework. He really understands Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin. He really gets it. He's put in the time because energy infrastructure is so critical in Texas. And so, he really addresses Bitcoin from that point of view of why we need it, and actually could help reinforce the power grid there because Texas has had some issues with its power grid. And he really loves the idea of capitalizing on stranded energy, taking stranded energy and turning it into power for Bitcoin mining and harnessing, innovation in the renewable space. So Ted Cruz and other politicians in Texas get it. They get the energy arguments. They get, the innovation that's being driven by Bitcoin mining technology. So yeah, it's exciting. I'd love to spend more time in Texas.
I love Ted Cruz because I just know him as the Bitcoin guy. He just talks about it with so much understanding, as we talked about earlier, that some celebrities, just by the way they talk, you understand that they don't actually get it. So about Ted Cruz, why is he controversial? Like, what's the deal with him that some people don't like him?
We just are so divided in the U.S. between red and blue, and if you're on the red, you're a list of items, like people are very polarized. And I think Ted Cruz is still trying to recover from when the power grid shut down and basically people were freezing and didn't have power in their homes. He took that flight to the Bahamas, and people were like, really, you're going to go on a family vacation to a beautiful place while people in your state are suffering? You should cancel the trip. So he did. He turned around and canceled the trip, but people were very upset with him. So.
I see. Okay. Also, that's really crazy that you have the blue state and the red state. Like, what? In Bulgaria, we have like 5, 6, 7 political powers that are battling it up to be running the government. And they always must do some coalitions, but they do different coalitions every time in order to, be in power.
Yeah, no, we have two. We have two, and that's how the establishment has been set up. And it's really frustrating because we have great people like the Ron Pauls of the world that wanted to come in and do something that's a little bit more in the center and common sense driven, especially when it comes to money, our financial system, like get rid of the Fed. And no one listens to him, and he couldn't win when he tried to run for president. So,
okay. Politics, Bitcoin, we have some politicians that are really endorsing it. We have some politicians that are just clearly jumping against it, either because of lack of understanding, either because they're paid to do that. Let's talk just about rich people. We talked about earlier how even rich people want justice. And I feel like especially rich people who gain their wealth with hard work, with being, just fast thinkers and acting and being a good employer, I feel like for them it's crucial to be independent from the government, to feel not threatened by the government, that someone through corruption could steal their business or whatever. I don't know if this happens in the States, maybe it doesn't, but in Bulgaria it does. If you don't have the correct connections in the government, you're literally one phone call away from someone to say, nice company you have there, can you sign me 51% of it, please? Literally, yeah, it is like that. And it's a common knowledge, like literally, that's how the country runs. And so that being said, I feel like what was his name? The second richest man in Mexico.
Ricardo Salinas.
Exactly, right. So he's a big Bitcoin proponent, and really, I've watched so many clips with him. I really love how he understands that what it gives you is censorship resistant money, it gives you independence, and it really makes your own bank, so you become a free electron. You can go anywhere around the world with your wealth and do whatever you want.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I love when I see people like Ricardo Salinas and Michael Saylor come out for Bitcoin and really be passionate about helping the little guy, because I think that there's such a disconnect now, and we almost see the rich people like in this cloud, right? They don't care about everybody else, but a lot of them really do. And I think it was Ricardo or someone else. There was a billionaire capital allocators panel at the Bitcoin conference 2 weeks ago. And one of them shared that 60% of his net worth is in Bitcoin. A billionaire, 60% of his net worth is in Bitcoin. So I think that that's pretty astonishing and amazing. Look, I don't begrudge people who are rich. I think that it's frustrating that the system has probably allowed there to be, a situation where someone becomes a billionaire and everyone else is kind of, their minimum wage job is no longer enough to support their family. But that's the system. That's not the billionaire's fault. That's the system that we need to address and fix and rework. I think that we're always going to have inequality on some level, because some people have more motivation. Some people want to work and build and innovate, and they want to take the risk that it takes to be an entrepreneur, and others don't,
Just like Jordan Peterson says, not equal, I don't know what was it, but equal opportunity. When you have the equal opportunity, whoever is more driven is going to achieve more. And I really love the fact, I watched Jordan Peterson for years. And then just like in the past 12 months, he got converted to be a Bitcoiner. And I'm just so happy that, these smart people that have nothing to do with Bitcoin, they realize it and they become big Bitcoin proponents.
No. I know, it's amazing. I love that. And there's going to be more and more. I actually had the chance to introduce Dr. Peterson on stage here in Miami. And you're right. I mean, he took the time to do that work. And I completely agree with what you and he said. It's like, the world is not going to be this perfect place where everyone's making the same amount and we're all just robots. But that's the direction we're headed in right now, where it's just, the government's going to hand you your paycheck. Everyone gets the same. Everyone's like this big blob of humanity. And no one can be different. No one can think differently. That is not a world that I want to see, especially when I have a family. That is not a world that I would want my kids to grow up in. I want a world where you work hard, you learn, you are passionate, you offer what you have in terms of your skills and desires to the world, and you're judged based on merit as opposed to who you know and what the narrative is. So I hope that Bitcoin helps with that.
Miami 2022 Bitcoin conference. Tell us your view on it now that a few weeks have passed. like what were the biggest things that happened there, the biggest announcements. We know the strike announcement with the integration with the whatever the name of that post terminal manufacturer was, how now a bunch of the big retailers in the US accept Bitcoin through the Lightning Network. And I really loved how he explained that you can do it absolutely non-KYC through a non-custodial Lightning Network wallet like Moon or whatever, and you can mine your own Bitcoin and then you can spend it and you can be 100% out of the system. And can you please just like give us, in your opinion, what maybe is an undervalued thing that got announced on the conference? Like last year we had a national state announcing that Bitcoin is going to become a legal tender and started purchasing Bitcoin, and this year it was slightly different, but as someone said, like each jurisdiction is going to have like different path toward Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the conference was incredible. The scale of it, I had gone to my first Bitcoin conference last year, 2021, and I thought that was big, and this one just blew it out of the water. It took, I think, $35 million to put on this event. I mean, just the scale of it was massive. The convention center here in Miami Beach was just so beautiful. And the speakers were incredible. So last year, it was a lot of the same speakers, right? We have the Michael Saylors, the Kathy Woods, people from Cash App, Samson Mao introducing these autonomous regions, just so many of the brilliant podcasters and authors in the space, Seyfedina Moose, Preston Pish, Jeff Booth, all of my favorites, really. So it was great to watch them. The panels, I think, are always so fascinating. But then they took it like one step further, and they had this massive stage where they were doing live anchoring. They had a huge volcano. I know President Bukele was supposed to speak, but unfortunately he's been dealing with things in his country, so he did not make it. But just all of the speeches, all of the panels were so fascinating, so intelligent, so thought-provoking and compelling. So I loved all of the talks. There's, events that happen during the week, which are really, really fun. I would say in terms of the biggest events, I would say the strike announcement was the biggest. Samson Mao, I think a lot of people were expecting the country of Honduras to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Instead, it was an island off of Honduras, and we got a couple of like autonomous regions. So we didn't get another nation state, unfortunately, like people were hoping. Let's see, Cash App had a big announcement in terms of being paid in Bitcoin and Lightning and all of that. But I guess there wasn't one thing that stood out in the same way that last year we had El Salvador. But at the same time, I think it was just a lot of really great announcements, really interesting speeches, and I thought the conference was amazing, and I'm just so grateful that I got to be part of it.
My personal take on it, watching it live on YouTube, was that firstly, the amount of people that went there was multiple times more than last year. And secondly, though, from what I understand, there was literally, firstly, so many businesses, obviously, that they paid to be there and have their, space there. But the fact that they paid and they were there just proves and shows how much development is happening in the space and how much money is there to be made in the space. And this is a good thing. This is not a bad thing. This means that a lot of people, a lot of engineers are working, and they're working obviously to improve, because they don't know to make money, you must bring value, right? Like, what are you going to give me? What can I do with Bitcoin thanks to you that I couldn't do before that? And like, for instance, one of the things that you can do today on DeFi or through centralized exchanges is take loans against your crypto, right? Like, that's amazing. That's amazing. So what we're waiting for is now like proper national banks to offer you this service. And oh my God, I can't remember the name of the company. NYDIG, I think it's NYDIG, a company that really pushes for adoption on the level of banks and building the infrastructure for them. So within their bank application, they can have the button buy Bitcoin directly from them instead of withdrawing the money to an exchange and buying it there.
Yeah, completely. I agree. I think it was inspiring to see just how much this space has grown and is being taken seriously by institutions, by billionaires, by people who have capital to allocate, and they need to protect the value of it. So yeah, it was really inspiring to see that. And you're absolutely right. Last year was 10,000 attendees. This year was more than 25,000. So I can only imagine what, next year or the year after that it's going to be.
that being said, the tickets at the moment are only $250, and the whale ticket is just 5,000. So maybe whoever's listening to this, it's not a bad idea to make a small investment from today so he can be ready for next year.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, listen, I have a few more questions up my sleeve, but I just want to ask you, are you able to run over 1 hour?
I'm sorry?
I said that I have a few more questions up my sleeve, but I'm just want to ask you, because I see that we are 47 minutes in. Can you run over the 1 hour mark so I know how to time my time?
I can't. No, I have to get out of here for a meeting. I'm sorry, at 10.
That's all right. That's all right. Okay, let's finish then at 55, okay, in 7 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. As I said again, Bulgaria is a small country. It's not economical power at all, and we literally, our eyes are toward the States. We're interested in what's happening there because it's gonna affect us more than what's happening in our country. So a few more questions. So I guess the big one would be, from what you've seen so far, how do you picture the adoption from here on? Like, there is this saying that when there is a need for something that solves your problem, then you don't think about it, you just act on it. And in Canada, on the protests, we had people's bank accounts being frozen just because they went on a protest or they sent money to GoFundMe to support the people protesting there. Then with Russia, the topic is not, is Russia right to start a war or whatever. It's not about that. It's about that it's a country that had some reserves and these reserves got frozen. And at least in my mind, if someone can freeze you something, it's not yours, it's in control in someone else. So then it's not yours. And now we are at 19 million Bitcoin that are being mined, just 2 million left, and the price is $40,000. Like, to me, there is a big disconnect between what is the value of Bitcoin and how it's proven itself with the insane printing of money, with the insane inflation, and where we are today. So what's your take on the current situation, and how do you see it developing in the next year or 5 years?
Sure. So first of all, I think when you zoom out and you look at the adoption curve of Bitcoin, it's really truly impressive. And there have been a lot of strategists and analysts in the space who have talked about how we're adopting faster than the internet in the 90s. So sometimes I think because we're in the space, you and I are, it's hard to see the daily changes, you know, from a big picture from 30,000 feet in the air. But truly, the adoption's happening in real time, very, very quickly. More institutions are onboarding. There are more avenues where I think people are able to invest. So the adoption is happening. That being said, one of the reasons why I love to do my podcast is I also love to examine the macroeconomic picture at large. You're in Bulgaria. You mentioned that you pay close attention to what's happening in the US. And I think that that's because we are the global reserve currency, and the decisions of our central bank impact everybody else around the world. And so while we see inflation of 7-8%, you know, in other countries, they see 50, 70, 80%. And we have so much power and control, or we did when it came to sanctions and sort of the stronghold on the global financial system, which I think is weakening now. And I think that we are at such an inflection point when it comes to debt and inflation that I personally, based on the people that I've interviewed, I personally feel like there's no going back now. Like, you can't fix it. It's so broken and so indebted and insolvent that the only way to keep propping up the system is printing more money, right? So like it's already over. The game, it's, Greg Foss puts it, it's just math. We will never be able to pay back these debts. So, you know, technically we would have to restructure them. Like, America's bankrupt and we need to restructure our debts, but they won't do that. The politicians come in, they all are short-sighted because they want to get reelected. Maybe they don't understand the system. They probably don't. So they just print more money, print, and they're good at one thing, and that's government spending. So I think that we're actually potentially at the precipice of a really big crash. I don't know when that'll happen because we kicked the can down the road really, really well. I think that a lot of the debt will unwind. A lot of the malinvestments that happen as the result of easy money and money printing will have to collapse and unwind. And I think it's going to be a really bad recession or a crash. I do believe we're going to have a deflationary bust. At that point, I don't know how far Bitcoin will crash. I hope it doesn't crash harder than 7,000, because you mentioned earlier that was your price point. But I do think at that point, people will see that they need to exit the current system that they're in onto this parallel one that can't be debased, can't be manipulated, can't be controlled, and that will hopefully preserve their purchasing power into the future, because what the politicians and central bank leaders are doing on the other side is just completely crashing the value of the dollar. So I think something will happen where basically there's like a seismic shift and people will have to exit. They'll have to find a life raft, and that life raft is Bitcoin. It's Noah's Ark that will usher in, you know, safety from this flood that we've created because of the debt that we've acquired in this country. So I don't know when that'll happen, but I do think that like the other system needs to have a breaking point for people on a massive scale, you know, for the billions and billions around the world to understand and appreciate Bitcoin. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you so much for your opinion. Let's wrap it off stream, and thank you for everyone who showed up and watched us live. And like the people who watched tonight, like, come on guys, try to watch live. I'm just kidding. See you later. See you in Thursday on the stream, and just final words and goodbyes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Hello to everyone in Bulgaria. If you are interested in checking out my podcast, it's called Coin Stories. You can find it on YouTube or all the audio podcast platforms, and you can visit me on my website, talkingbitcoin.com.
We know you, we cover you quite frequently, so the audience is quite familiar with you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay, bye guys.